Hello, it's Bagoon back with another video in my Asian Mythology Learn to Trigger Basics series. This one we don't really have a specific topic to go over. I'm just going to go over a few general short things that aren't enough to make a video out of their own, but are still quite important for the aspiring trigger maker. I'm going to go through some conditions first, and then some effects. So, just looking at what we've got here, we know quite a few of these already, like always and the army conditions. We know the chat contains from the previous level. Difficulty level. This corresponds to easy, moderate, hard and titan. However, you can't set difficulty in custom scenarios. You can only do it for random maps. So that's why this one wouldn't be too useful for you. We know all about the distance conditions. It's quite a lot of God power conditions. We know about being alive. We know about being dead. Percent damage. I haven't really covered this one, but it's what it says on the tin. So it would be if a unit was equal to or greater than 10% damage, an effect would trigger. You could use this, for example, in a boss battle if you wanted to trigger lots of different abilities to fire depending on how much damage the boss has taken. We can look at the player being human, which is quite useful in scenarios as you have a set player count and you can't always fill up the slots. You can also use player resigned to check if a player is in the game. We've mentioned player resource count before, and there's lots of quest var conditions as well, which we can use with inputting a quest var as our number instead of an actual number that we type out. Covered the units in area, so units in line of sight and visible to player. These conditions, again, they do what they say, but they're best used in single player as they can get a bit funky online and cause sync errors. That's pretty much all the conditions. So next, we've got a few more effects to go through, which are going to be quite helpful. So, first of all, AI. There's an AI set blank AI, which is quite useful for player 0, Mother Nature, in your maps. Otherwise, you might find that there's some unexpected behaviours of your units. This can also be applied to computer players, but Asian Mythology Extended Edition gives you the ability to set no AI in the drop-down menu when you're actually hosting a map. So this could be used for your computer players. Next, we've got plenty of army effects, which we've already covered in previous videos. Blocking all sounds can sometimes be useful if you wanted certain sound effects to not play. The reciprocal of this one is the unblock all sounds with a U. We've got plenty of camera cuts, change units, chat conditions, and timers. The conditional effects are really useful, but that's more of an intermediate topic. Next, we've got diplomacy. Now, this will set diplomacy. You do know that there is a diplomacy button in the scenario, which you can use. However, this just works in the scenario. It doesn't work online. So this is what's used to override teams online. You could use player range to save you doing loads of triggers. So this one would just set Gaia as an ally for all players 1 to 12. Next, we've got the destroy trigger, and this is slightly different to the kill trigger or damage units of 100%. On the face of it, it might look fairly similar as the unit is removed from gameplay, but that's the thing. This one completely removes a unit, so if we did it on militia here, I'm going to leave it as normal priority so we can see it in action. What's going to happen is instead of the unit dying and leaving behind a corpse, it's simply removed from the game. This is quite useful for heroes in the single player campaigns such as Arcantos and Amamna that have a respawn. This one would completely remove them from the game without the ability for them to regenerate. Speaking of regeneration, we could have this ourselves if we were to damage a unit and have it on a looping trigger. Moving on, we've got the end game effect. This is the very last one that we have. This is the one that ends the game and triggers the post-game effects. We've covered fade to colour. Fade out music and sounds is quite useful for transitions as well. We've covered fire event. Flare minimap will show a flare on the player's minimap of a specified duration. It can be quite useful for objectives or telling someone where to go, or they've got a unit in the shop. We've covered flash units before. We've covered plenty of god power and resource effects before. Hide score is just going to hide the score. It's equivalent to pressing the F4 key. We know about highlighting units and immediate garrison and invoking god powers. We know all about message and modify proto unit and move commands. Got music play. This is quite a useful one to have in your scenarios, as it will continuously choose a music track from the Age of Mythology soundtrack, and then after that finishes it will play another one. Music stop stops it. Play dialogue we've already covered in our cinematic checks. Line of sight change can be quite useful. This one will work online, so it can give line of sight that player 0 would see everything player 1 sees. It's equivalent to the omniscience tech, which is what I usually use for Gaia in my maps to make sure that line of sight is always present and they can always invoke god powers as needed. You've got player set civ and culture and set civ and culture by name. We can use this to override a player's civilization. So if we wanted to go to Isis Egyptian, this would override a player's god choice. So this player might have chosen to be Uranus, but if you require the player to be Egyptian, you use that trigger and you can now see we're Egyptian, and we've even got the prosperity god power. We've covered the render fog black map, as well as plenty of quest var conditions and effects. You can use this to put your quest vars in without having to use that 1+ code that I've shown you in my previous video. Okay, set lighting is quite a useful one. This allows you to change the lighting of a map, and you can specify how long you want the change to be. You can see this in action here. You can also change the default lighting in a map with the light bulb effect, and there's plenty of mod ones as well as default ones which you can use. We've also got render sky and render snow. Snow does what it says on the tin, it's a value of 0 to 100. Sky, there's 4 values to choose from in this, so there's sky blue, sky sunset, sky stormy, and sky winter. Sky sunset is the one that's usually used because it is bigger than the other ones in terms of the area it affects. I can show you what this looks like, because what sky does is it makes sky. We need a portion of the black map visible in order to do this. So if I do a camera cut here and put a timer on here, what you'll see is we now have snow coming down and this lovely sky in the background instead of the black map that we've been used to in the past. These rate triggers here determine how fast certain things happen in the game. So for building, researching and training, you can increase these to double or even 10 times their normal value. Set tech status is quite useful. Sometimes you will need to set an age 2 before you can get certain abilities, but this means you could have things like the stone wall for just nicer looking effects in your scenarios, as well as making a player look like they're in a different age to the starting age. Set current hit points is quite a useful one as well. does exactly what it says on the tin. You can determine what hit points that unit will have. Sound file name, I've used it before, it plays a sound. Sound timer is something we shouldn't be using online, it just causes potential errors and sync errors. Teleport units, transform, unblock all sounds. We've covered all of these. You can set the scale of a unit to make it bigger or taller if you're just using the Y plane. You can also set obscured units. What this does is you'll see that the militia turns to blue at a certain angle here. If you wanted to essentially hide the unit outlines, that's the trigger we'd want to be using. So this is the effects that we'd want to be using, and we turn it on there. We can disable units with the forbid and disable unit trigger. What this does is if you had a villager and they had lots of build options but you didn't want them to be able to build in the scenario, this would stop them building an academy. Same is true if you had buildings and you didn't want them training units, you could do it this way. The opposite of this is to unforbid and enable unit, which just does the same thing. So you could have certain units that the player couldn't train being re-enabled, or you could just try and put that on there and see what happens with it. Final one to come through is disable trigger. This does work for looping triggers, so all you'd need to do is type the name of the trigger in there, but this would only happen when this trigger runs. So as starters run immediately, this one wouldn't disable the start effects because the start trigger runs first. If I just did a looping chat, I could demonstrate this one for you. So this one we're just going to spit out the message default. I'm going to copy that in there so that we're disabling it, and we're sending another chat saying end. This is going to be after 1.5 seconds. If we wanted, we could then re-enable it a bit later with the fire event trigger. So fire event will always enable, disable will always disable. Just remember, if you do something by fire event, you're automatically disabling it. So there we go, we've got our text going, it's finished, and then it's starting back again. There we go. That shows you all of the further conditions and effects I wanted to explain for this series. It should arm you with a decent arsenal and help you get ready to make your scenarios. I'll see you in the next video.